Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Rachel Exil. The COVID-19 crisis has revealed another tier of underlying issues in our societies concerning the role of women, even in 2021. The global pandemic has aggravated the existing challenges women continue to face, both in their personal and professional lives. Lockdowns have worsened tensions at home, where women are often victims of domestic abuse. On the other hand, women have led way in the battle against COVID through important medical and scientific work, as well as policy and decision-making in managing the crisis. This Monday, the world marked International Women's Day, and the Jerusalem Press Club has teamed up with the German embassy in Israel to raise these issues among our audiences. Today, you will hear from a range of inspiring and hardworking experts and leaders on their experiences over the past year. I would like to thank the German embassy in Israel for their initiative and continued partnership in bringing unique voice from our two countries to be heard by the International Diplomatic and Press Corps. I'm honored to invite Dr. Susanne Wasum-Rainet, Germany's ambassador to Israel, to open the event with welcoming words.
Thank you so very much. Dear Uri Dromi, dear Tal Schneider, Professor Allmendinger, Dr. Viola Priesemann, Professor Mona Khoury, dear Tamar Zandberg, who will be joining us later. I'm so delighted and so happy to see such a group of successful, charismatic, powerful women carrying a lot of responsibility within our respective societies, both in Germany and in Israel, around our virtual table. And thank you very much for gathering us. As you said, our today's event takes place on the occasion of International Women's Day. And our objective with this event is to contribute to the empowerment of women in general and to the raise of awareness for the problem of gender inequalities. From the German side, we have with Professor Allmendinger and Dr. Viola Priesemann prominent experts whose voices have been heard before the crisis already, but all over these months of health pandemic, of crisis, and their advice has been sought in Germany throughout all the time. Last year was indeed a tough one for gender equality. The impact of crisis is never gender neutral, and the COVID-19 crisis has not been an exception to that rule. It hit women more than men. More women than men lost their jobs and were burdened with additional unpaid care and domestic work. And at the same time, we all realized how, let's say, female our system of essential work is. From cashiers in the supermarkets, nurses, medical doctors, to research and development, we were reminded all of a sudden of the crucial importance of women in keeping our economic and health systems running. Yet, female voices were not always the most prominent ones in defining political strategies to cope with and to overcome this crisis. And against this backdrop, the aim of today's discussion is to shed light both on the contribution of women to the crisis management, as well as showcasing the impact of the crisis on them. So we are very grateful that our experts have agreed to use this virtual platform to share their academic insights, but also reflect on their self-perception as a female voice in the crisis. So let me just end with thanking you, the Jerusalem Press Club, for an excellent cooperation. And I look very much forward to listening to all of you. And I know this would be fruitful for all our participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And now I'd like to invite Tal Schneider, political correspondent from the Times of Israel. Mrs. Schneider has placed the issue of women's representation at the forefront of the journalistic effort, and we cannot think of a more fitting moderator for our event. Thank you, Tal, for being with us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. I'm really honored to be here and to be the one who invited to host this panel. we have an amazing women with us today, and we're looking forward to hear from them. As said, I am the political correspondent for the Times of Israel, and we are looking at this year of pandemic. We are approaching March 15, which is the day all schools in Israel were shut down almost a year ago to the day. And I think employees, workers in Israel, but especially women in Israel, have felt this, not just the sickness in the streets and the problems of the pandemic, but also the huge problems and challenges we had at the workforce for Israeli, mom and dads, but mostly I think, moms. So it was also a challenge for not just working moms, but also for women without kids or family, who we know from the research by now that most of them, most of the people that lost their job are females. So I'm looking forward to hear from you. And first we will start with Mrs. Viola Priesemann. I thank you for being with us today. Your research based on mathematics methods and on big data information with respect to the pandemic, to the way the pandemic has forwarded, was very, very crucial. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your experience, dating back to the beginning when you had to jump in with your calculations.
Yeah, dear Ambassador, dear Tal Schneider, thank you very much for the invitation. Obviously, I would love to be in Israel. I also would like to send my greetings to all the great colleagues with whom I'm collaborating, also in Israel. So we now look back to a year of pandemic. I and my research group, we realized very early on that there is a pandemic that certainly will span the entire world, because as soon as it's out of one country, it typically spreads, especially with this typical symptoms and the incubation period, it spreads over the world. And it was very early on that we joined forces in terms of knowledge here at the Göttingen campus, very quickly bringing together virologists, public health people, and us as theoreticians. So we could put together a very well-informed model to predict the effectiveness, so to predict the case numbers and infer the effectiveness of intervention. So the effectiveness of school closure on controlling the pandemic, the effectiveness of the contact ban that we had then a week later. Mm-hmm. We did not have a look back then quantitatively at the impact on what this has to the human and the women and the families in detail. This is beyond the models that we unfortunately can model. This was, I think, our first great success. We managed to publish this paper in Science, which is very rewarding for a scientific career, as you might know. We then continued and wondered of how to mitigate the pandemic, because in our view, it is for everyone, for health, for society, for economy, and obviously then also for families, the best to have and keep low case numbers. We find in our models that there's no advantage to accepting another wave, except for delaying strong restrictions a tiny bit, but then having the strong restrictions in place much longer. We parceled out something that's well known in physics, and some people might know it from climate change. We found a tipping point. If case numbers are low, then health authorities and the testing can concentrate on the few infection chains that there are and stop them effectively. If, however, case numbers are high, then the system is out of control. It's like a fire being out of control. And if the fire is out of control, then the contact tracing is too slow. There's not sufficient tests to identify all the people who might be infected. And there's an increasing number of hidden cases, so people who are not aware of the infection. And these people are the drivers of the pandemic. If a person is not aware of the infection, they bring the virus to elderly, to people at risk, they spread it more than they would spread it otherwise. So detecting these cases, even if it's mildly symptomatic or hardly at all symptomatic, is very, very important to stop or to keep the case numbers low. If one allows them to have high case numbers, one basically loses this means of a pandemic containment. and overall the containment becomes more difficult. This is something very easy and straightforward to understand. It's something that, at least from the theoretical perspective, it's open on the hand. And I think the third contribution that I had in the past year was bringing together dozens of European and international scientists to discuss what the difference of low or high case numbers not only have for the pandemic, but also for the social equality and for economy. We have a consensus paper out that was then signed by more than 1,000 scientists in the Lancet in December, which really discusses of the advantages of the low case numbers and also puts a strong focus, which had before almost been neglected, to the international perspective. The virus does not stop at the border. They cross the border, they cross it with people. So it is not possible to have one strategy in one country completely independent of the strategies in the other countries. So bringing people together, trying to find a consensus also across the different disciplines, that has been, I think, one of the challenging but also extremely rewarding experiences for me in the past year.
Okay. You make it sound very easy, and you say it's just a mathematic model and it's easy to calculate. But I'm pretty sure that if you look back a year ago, it wasn't that easy to think, what is the model, or how do I mean, it wasn't a straightforward answer right away. It took some, I think, weeks or months to just, how do I calculate this? Can you go back to March, maybe February of 2020, and tell us what brought you to think the way you were thinking?
So in February, March, we saw case numbers rising, and the basic model that describes such a pandemic are so-called branching processes. It's proliferation, and this describes not only branching of viruses, it also describes very roughly the growth of bacterial colonies or the spread of names, of family names. And we had been working on it because it also approximates the spreading of activity or information in the brain. So we had all the models in place. The main point was to adapt them to the pandemic. This is why we were so quick with our first project. We basically had all the advanced Bayesian inference methods all there, and it was about collecting and bringing together the detailed information about incubation period, potential deadliness, hypothesis about how much underreporting do we have. That was really the main challenge. And then obviously, maybe because this is at the occasion of the Women's Day, obviously there's family work. Schools were closed on 15th of March in Germany, like in many other countries around the time. And we were faced with not only doing work from research work from, I think, 6 in the morning until midnight, but parallel to that also having to take care of the kids. And there I must say, I think many successful women have a partner who at least takes half of the work. And I think I'm pleased and have the pleasure to have a great partner who at that period really took over a larger fraction of the work, at least for a few weeks.
So right now, do you have any calculation or models with respect to the vaccination? It was interesting to me that you said that one of your conclusion is keeping the number of the cases very low in order to control it. And here in Israel, the approach is a little bit different. The approach is vaccinate as much as you can in order to have the disease controlled. So two approaches.
With the vaccination, we are exactly modeling that at the moment. We probably have a preprint out in the coming days. The vaccination progress is the main and by far main determinant of how much contacts we can have. And now you have two possibilities. Either you are opening your contacts a bit faster than the vaccination, then you'll have high case numbers. Or you open your contacts and loosen the restrictions a bit slower than the vaccination pace, then you'll have low case numbers. And it's a difference of just a few percent. It's really a tiny, tiny difference. So it is a question of wanting to have low or wanting to have high case numbers. It's not a question of freedom or restrictions. I think it's a common misunderstanding that you kind of accept more cases and more death and therefore gain more freedom. But exactly the opposite is the case.
Interesting, very interesting. Maybe you can tell us a bit about how important is the voice of women in Germany and in this crisis, because here in Israel we have, we think of Germany as very progressive in equal rights. It's not a huge surprise that you have an ambassador woman and you have scientists. I mean, I think we were expecting, you have your chancellor, of course. So how do you think, the fact that you are a so prominent scientist in Germany and a woman reflect on your work?
So I often had the opposite impression. So one of my really core and key role models is Ayelet Landau, who is now at Hebrew University. She's a few years older than me, and she had basically kids already, does great science, and basically showed me how to bring the energy in to do it all at the same time. So I always saw this as a very, very strong woman and role model. Here in Germany, with the outbreak of COVID, I think a typical pattern evolved, which is that initially, I think it was more the male experts that were bold enough to go to the public in general, especially among those people who had not had a lot of experience with talking to the press. I was completely naive with respect to that. So I definitely waited until I was dead sure about my results before I would voice my ideas or conclusions publicly. And I think that was a bit different in other groups or communities.
So can you tell us of a bit of a personal experience? You had to go to the press, you had to prepare yourself. How was that?
As a scientist, finding a good way and simplifying one's own research results such that they are still correct but also understandable, it's a stretch, and I as a physicist had little experience with that. The second thing that really hits one hard is all the negative feedback that comes from a lot of different sides if one is not used to that. And there, exchanging myself or talking with other, especially female scientists, like these very well-known virologists, Melanie Brinkmann, Sandra Zizek, really strongly helped me to put that into relation to see that it just hits everyone alike and that one will survive it at some point.
It's interesting. In Israel, one of the women professors, a prominent doctor, Galia Rahav, just came out to the press yesterday and said how she's being hunted by people who are opposing vaccinations, and they actually blaming her, and they attacking her and her kids and her family. Just for the scientific approach, do you feel any? You just mentioned that you had some backlash. Do you feel a personal backlash?
So the personal backlash, or the backlash, comes from two sides. One is the emails that one gets, but this has waned, I think, for two reasons. One is because the positions are more clear and the discussion is just more polarized, but also more segregated. Everyone is a bit more in their own bubble, and I think people don't believe that they can bring me to the right side anymore. In terms of the personal backlash or from the colleagues, it's amazing how much positive support one gets, except sometimes when people read the press and don't know what one has said before. And that, I think, is the third part that's the most difficult one, that the press uses one so much to polarize the discussion. Being in an article of Bild Zeitung in Germany is not something where one feels well represented. I guess you can imagine.
Very interesting. As a scientist, a woman scientist, can you tell us a bit about your career? You think that everything is open to women? Does Germany encourage high schoolers to go into the scientist professions, or is it much more tough for women?
I do think, depending on how much time I have, there's a few key moments. I definitely grew up in a society where at least in my personal view, all mothers were at home only. None of them had a job. And for me, I didn't really want to stay at home, but I also did not have a single role model of persons who would do a job and have a family at the same time. Thus, I started to study without really having an idea or a clear aim or knowing where to go. And I do, for example, remember I was about 12-year old, and the father of a friend told me about his work. It was super exciting. It was about artificial voice detection, what we now call AI. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. But I knew intuitively, without reflecting on it, that I would never do this. And I think the second moment was I was studying physics, and it was, I think, only in my third or fourth year that suddenly there was this new door sign, which was Professor Barbara Drossel. And I was like, wow, one can become a professor. It's not that if one had asked me, I would have said it's impossible. But seeing it, I suddenly realized that I would have never considered it as an option. And I think this is the background in which I grew up. And I'm now very, very happy whenever I get feedback from young women saying that I now am a role model for them. That's
Wow.
really great to have.
That's wonderful. I wish we could talk more for the voice detection thing we just read in Israel. Maybe they will, with the voice detection, they will do a corona test in the future when it's going to be, more developed. There is a device that they're working on, and so it's scientists are giving, I think, us Israeli and the entire humanity, they're giving us inspiration in a year like that, and you are certainly an inspiration. I want to thank you so much. And now I hope for, I call on my two next panelists to have their Zoom unmute. Dr. Jutta Allmendinger, I hope I got your name correct.
Fine.
And Professor Muna Khoury-Kasbari. With your name, I have no problems pronouncing your last name, Khoury. It's common for us. I welcome both of you to the conversation, and we will talk about the place of the woman in the workforce. Maybe Jutta, is it okay if I call you Jutta?
Of course.
Thank you. Maybe you can start by presenting your study and your work in the last year.
Yeah. Hello again to all of you. I'm really excited. I'm excited to see Ambassador Wasum-Rainet again. And for me, of course, it's very easy to pronounce your name, Til Schneider. I mean, it sounds very charming indeed. So it's my pleasure, and I indeed can tell a little bit what has happened to women in general. And you can't understand this story without knowing about the situation in Germany before COVID started. So let me give you a glimpse of socio-economic situation of women in 1998, well, 2019 or something like this. Mm-hmm. So the pay gap in Germany is high. It amounts to 18 to 19%, but looking at those 18 or 19% is not what harms women most. It's awful, but it does not harm women most. What harms women most is that they work considerably less paid work hours. So they are usually working for 23, 24 hours, while men are working 39 hours. And the work time of men is not very different during the entire life course, while women decrease their labor force participation still considerably after having given birth. And they also interrupt their work time considerably after having given birth. In the aggregate, they are out for 13 months, while men are out for 3 months at a maximum. So this is a figure, and with this unequal share of paid and unpaid work, of course, go along a lot of huge differences in terms of life income, in terms of pension income, but of course also in terms of high positions. And we have only few positions who are in the highest ranks of the private sector or politicians. I mean, you referred to Angela Merkel, but we had actually a decrease in politicians from the last government to the present government. We also have an increasing number of female professors, but we don't really see many visible voices in the science. So you picked 2 out of probably at a maximum 15. So there are good research being done which shows that they are still underrepresented in media coverage, in writing articles for newspapers and things like this. So we still also do not have full-time schooling, which is a major handicap, and it has been one in my own career as well. And we don't have the childcare, which is necessary for young children below the age of 3. And it's usually not really accepted to give young kids early to childcare. So we have this wonderful word of a raven mother, which is entirely mistaken because ravens really take best care to get their children as independent as possible, as soon as possible. So it's, but yeah, so we have those cultural norms. We also have structural impediments, like our tax system, for example, like schools which close, which are half-day schools, and I could go on and go on and go on. And of course, those cultural and structural impediments intervene.
Okay.
On top of this, COVID comes in. And what has happened is that women decrease their paid work even more, that they increase their unpaid work even more. Men did as well, but a little bit less. Proportionally, of course, they increased it considerably more, but proportional measures, as we all know, are probably not the right measures to look at. And we had this hybrid home office, which is not gender-free. So I claim since May, and the newest data confirm early results of my studies, that COVID has been detrimental for women's careers.
So Professor Jutta Allmendinger, I did not present you properly. I apologize for that.
You do not have to present.
No, but let me please. You are the president of the WZB Berlin Social Science Center and professor of educational sociology and labor market research. And so I apologize for not giving the proper introduction. And we are now, we'll talk to Professor Muna Khoury-Casbari, again, a full professor and dean of the Paul Berwald School of Social Work and Social Welfare at the Hebrew University. It's a great honor to have you, Professor Khoury, because not only you are, chairing one of the most important schools in Israel for social work, you are also maybe the only Israeli Arab professor who chairs a school. So it's a great pleasure to talk to you. Maybe you kindly present your study through that year.
So thank you, Tal, and thank you all for the invitation. I wanted to present it with a presentation, but I think I will discuss it without that, because I think we can make a discussion. It's more interesting than just talking about the things that happened. So I'm not sure how much you are familiar with the Israeli society. So I shortly will say that, as you know, the Arab population in Israel, we are in Israel here 9 million, and the Arab population comprises 20% of the Israeli total population. And one of the main features of the Arab population is that it's a very young population. So the children comprise 28% of the Arab population. So we are larger when we are looking at the young ages, which means that in the future, the Arab population will be much more than 20% that we are now. And this is actually, these numbers affect a lot of what happens in Israel and the planning in the education system and the increasing access for the Arab population to come to the universities, because we know that in 10 or 20 years, the workforce will need to depend largely on the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox population. So this is why the government needs to invest more and more on these two populations. And actually, I will talk about the situation of the Arab women during the pandemic, and I will not discuss it from a point of research point of view, but from my social activities that I was involved in several committees related to COVID-19 and the women's work. And one of the things that we know in general before the pandemic, that the rate of participation of Arab women, until when I need to stop, just give me a sign. So
I will, don't worry.
Okay, so the participation of Arab women in the Israeli job market is significantly lower than those of the Jewish population and of the Arab men. And actually, Arab women face multiple barriers, both structural and pre-existing ones, related to that they have insufficient industrial and commercial zones near the Israeli Arab towns and villages, inadequate public transportations from the Arab town and villages to the employment centers, and there are no daycares for a long time, the whole day, and all these things. So we know that Arab women has work less than participate less in the job market, and these barriers affect not only their integration in the job market, but also their earning capacity when they are integrated. Still, we should also mention the good things that we can see that since early 2000, we see that there is an increase in the number of Arab women who are participating in the workforce. It increased from 22% to almost 1/3, and which is a good numbers, but it's still very low compared to other populations. And one of the things that we have seen also during the last 10 years, the increase of numbers of Arab women who are in the higher education. We see that more Arab females complete their high schools compared to males, and at least the numbers at the Hebrew University, in all the degrees, we have more females than males. Mm-hmm. So if we're discussing good things for women, it's very good, but it's actually a very bad sign of what is going on with Arab males. And this is for another discussion, not for that, but like we know that the high numbers of females are because we have also very low numbers of males who are attending higher education, and unfortunately, we see what's happening when you don't have higher education and you don't complete your high school and all that. So during the pandemic, we have seen that the damage for Arab women in the job market was very critical because it increased and widened the gaps between them and other groups. And this is mainly because Arab women when they lost their job and gone to furlough, because they earn usually minimum wages and work part-time jobs, their unemployment benefit was very low, which affected their level of income. Okay. And also we saw that...
I just want to, if that's okay, stop you right here. And I want to ask the two of you, you are researchers, you are academics, and everything is like a roller coaster. It's only a year, and we are learning as we go about the implication. Sorry, but do you see in your respective governments, do you see any thinking of approaching the issue with respect to the challenges that are facing women with, you know, how do you proceed with the stay-at-home kids, you know, or how do we treat the job markets that obviously is hurting more women than men? I'm sorry.
Well, it's the beginning of the pandemic, so a year from now, this was not the case whatsoever. They decided to close the schools and childcare facilities, and obviously thought, well, women will take care of it. And there was not much discussion at all. It also has been the case at the commission, and I'm myself member of the Leopoldina, one of the big academies in Germany. They were composed of, I think, 28 people. On average, they were 62 years old, with 2 women being part of this commission. And so it not came as a surprise that they simply forgot about the situation, in particular of young mothers, and how they should possibly handle schooling for their children. We were not very well prepared in terms of digital teaching or digital learning, doing their own work, preparing the household and things like this. No, there is a clear no. Otherwise, the government did fine. We had this home office, those short-time work allowances. After some while, we had the corona allowances for children. It did not help all women, but at least it helped some women. And those women who were left entirely apart were, of course, lone mothers who really have a very awful fate.
So you describe a government that it is thinking of women in this crisis. It's not ignoring this specific issue, right?
Oh no, at the beginning it was ignoring the fate of women entirely. By now it is indeed better, and they are thinking about it. They are thinking primarily about money and giving them financial help. But what women, in particular working women, need to have now is more time to focus on their work. And in particular in this academic sector in which I'm working in, women are far behind doing their studies, doing their qualificational work, getting the thesis done, preparing themselves on academic labor market. So there are huge problems which will continue for the time when we have hopefully overcome COVID.
Professor Khouri, do you see the Israeli government approaching any of the issues right now with the, gender approach, or is it, we know that they are talking about the Arab society, specifically in the vaccination. We see a gap, and we do see the government officials talk about the vaccination gap, constantly. But when it comes to the job market, or maybe the underpaid employees, the poor people, we don't see really. I mean, unless you have a different thought.
I totally agree with you, Tal. It's actually like I heard my friend what she said, and actually we don't have anything of that. Like the government is now focusing on vaccination. It's not focusing on anything related to the job market in general, and of course not in the Arab women in particular. We know that they have not invested in the Arab population for many years, so I'm not sure this is the time that they will invest in that. The only thing that they are investing in now is increasing the numbers of people who are vaccinated. And actually, I can't even believe that they are so worried for our health conditions, because also in this situation, if you are not vaccinating, you are damaging the whole society and not only yourself. So differently than the job market and other issues, that if you don't have education or you don't work, you mainly damage yourself. And so in the issue of the corona, it's not this situation. So this, I believe, why they are so worried about the Arab population in this case. So we know that the Arab women face a lot of difficulties in the job market in generally, and in this period in particular. And young Arab women also were damaged in this situation because they were not able to work, and unemployment benefits in Israel are given from age 20, because it's related to the given the mandatory military service for the Jews. So Arab females who were, when they graduated high school and they were working, and then they went for unemployed, they were not eligible for the unemployment benefits. So this is, if they want to change, this is one thing to start with.
So we have here a discrimination that is not out in the open, because it gives the money only to people that are at a certain age, whereas the Arab society, it's not just female, it's also males, right? In the Arab society, who are young workers. Can I ask you, Professor Khouri, about another...
I mentioned females because males are not unemployed, but it's also for males and for all people who are not serving in the army. It doesn't matter who is that. You are eligible for unemployment benefits if you are younger than 20.
I'm going to ask the two of you maybe the same question. It's with respect to the change of the workforce. Some governments are working very hard to provide new, how do you say that? Akhsharot, I forget the word in English. Change of job. They help, they assist the society. We do know that, entire sectors of society like tourism, like restaurants and maybe nightlife, they collapsed. And the government comes in and offers some change in career with money, governmental money. Was anything done in Germany to help the public? Professor Jutta.
Well, I mean, there are two transformations going on at the same time. So one indeed is a transformation of the labor market, where the production sector decreases and there are primarily men in it. And of course, this caring system, this increases and there are particular women working in it, which of course then raises the question of money. So how much do you get paid when you are a nurse, when you are doing all those female jobs? And here we didn't make a lot of progress. Last year we had this applause at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 6 o'clock in the afternoon for all women who are doing those system relevant work. This stopped by now, and when I look at the wage development, there's not much being done. But indeed, you are entirely right. We would have to have much, much more measures and help, governmental help, help from unions, help from employers, to give them the chance for a second or a third education, moving in other jobs, which have a longer future than those we are presently in.
Okay.
But this is not just a female problem. This indeed is primarily a male problem.
Professor Khoury?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure that we have this much of training for the new job market, but I believe that is something that I hope the new government will emphasize in the new plan that they want for them for dealing with all the difficulties and all the problems that have happened because of the COVID-19. And one of the things is training for new jobs that are more required than in the past. But I think that this period now we are having like this thinking that the world will gonna change and everything is going to be in another way, totally in another way. I'm not sure that this is going to be the situation, and I think we are in a stage that in between the two periods, and in one point, I believe most of the things might go back to what we had in the past. Some of them will be incorporated into the regular working places, but I'm not sure like the universities now, we are not able to continue teaching in Zoom and schools and all this. All our system is not built to be this way. So if we want to do it, we have to do it according, like, to invest more things and efforts and resources. So I'm not sure that we are able to do that. So many things will go back to what it was before, but with the new things that we have learned from this time, like having this meeting in Zoom.
Okay.
Just let me clarify. I did not want to imply that Germany is doing well in giving people a second or third chance. Other countries are much, much better. So sorry if I misarticulated me in this respect.
No, it's I see that we still have Professor Priesemann online with us, and maybe my last question about the way the disease has spread. Again, looking back for this year, we saw a very touchy society in the elderly everywhere around the world, not just in Israel. So the spread of the virus was very harsh on elderly home I suppose in Germany as well as in Israel. And Mrs. Priesemann, if you want to participate, I'd be more than happy to hear you. And again, for Jutta and for Mona, it's in Israel, some of the interesting things that happened is the gap between the Jewish and the Arab society at the beginning of the disease, we saw that not many in the Arab society are using elderly home, because it's very common for the Arab society, the Arab sector, for the family is taking care of its own elderly people, and they are staying in home with their, grown-up kids. Of course, the task of handling and taking care of them is on the mothers usually. But for that reason, not many of the elderly in the Arab society were hit at the beginning, because the spread in the elderly home did not hit them, as opposed to the Jewish society. So, I mean, it's very different from culture to culture. I suppose the question is, the virus doesn't know anything about culture, but obviously, if you don't have elderly houses, then it's maybe manageable.
Yeah, actually, one thing that many people say, the virus is not discriminating between people, but it does. It does, because we know that, like, the family system or the family composition in the Arab society totally different than the Jewish one. And we know the same thing in the Haredi society. If you are 10 people living in one room, for sure you will be affected by the virus more than 2 people who are living in 4 rooms. Mm-hmm. So even though we want to say, and a lot of people say, we are equally affected by the virus, we know that it's not correct. And we know now the data about the vaccination, that there is a correlation between the level of education and the vaccination. So we know that it's affected by that, and the same thing with virus before. So we know that in the beginning, we were not affected because what you said, the elderly were safe and all that, but then I think the Arab population, finally, we were at the first place for something. Mm-hmm. The largest number of people who were sick.
So I could say 2 things about that. So for the elderly, we in Germany, I think, have three phases in the wave. The first, or in the past year, the first wave hit mainly the people who were skiing and who were on business trips. So it was not hitting the elderly. In the summer, we had extremely low incidence among the risk groups, and we had very dense testing. So we are pretty sure about that. So in the summer, it was then more and more the younger catching the virus, because they had been taking less caution for good reason. They are less affected. And then towards the winter again, the dark number rose. And with the dark number rising, and also with the healthcare workers bringing partly the virus into the homes of elderly, it was sometimes extremely difficult to stop an outbreak in a home of elderly. And that brings me to the point that Mona mentioned, which is very similar here, without having this specific division, but people who are in a larger household obviously have more contacts to the outside. So within the household, it's very difficult to stop the virus. How would you? Mm-hmm. And then it's a question of how many contacts do you have to the outside? If you have 2 parents working in home office and the kid at school at home, there's no outside contacts. But if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people in a household who have to go to work because they can't do home office, who potentially work at a place where they have a lot of contacts, like, for example, the meat factories, and then sure, the probability for each of them to bring the virus home, plus the sheer number, or simply the number of people in the household, that multiplies. So it's not to a surprise, and it's well known from other countries. In Germany, we don't have the data, but from other countries, that predominantly the socially less, how do you call this correctly? People are tremendously more affected.
Mm-hmm. Professor Jutta? Did you want to react to that?
No, I entirely agree. No disagreement on that.
Okay, I want to thank the 3 of you, and Dr. Viola Priesemann, I want to thank you also. I did not mention that you are researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Dynamics and Self-Organization, and teaches at the Greg August University, Göttingen. I hope I got the names correctly. I apologize for missing your important titles at the beginning. I think maybe I got overexcited from meeting such a wonderful panel. And I did, you know, I was equal rights for everybody. I didn't mention everybody's title. So forgive me for that. I think it's important.
Please don't worry about that.
No, I think it's very important to have the recognition. You're such an accomplished woman with such an amazing credentials. And it was my, my mistake. So I apologize for that. And please, continue your impressive work and give us inspiration for the common people, for the work that you, the scientific and the research work that you're all doing. And now I'm happy to have a member of the Knesset, Tamar Zandberg from Meretz party. Let me start by saying that up until 2 hours ago, we were supposed to have Tamar Zandberg and another MK, Sharen Haskel. She is from, Sharen Haskel is from a right-wing party. Tamar Zandberg is from a left-wing parties. But the campaign headquarters of Haskel canceled on her maybe an hour before we start this beautiful event. So I'm very pleased to have Tamar. Hi, Tamar. You are, I see that you are driving in your car.
I'm not driving, but I'm in the car.
I'm in the car.
I have my assistant driving.
Okay.
I'm safe with you.
That's great to see you.
That's the thing about the digital events. You can attend in the car as well.
Yes, it's we are, for those viewers who don't know, we are maybe 13 days before the election. Where are you heading at the moment?
I'm heading from a interview in Kalkalist we had a panel in the studio. It will be broadcast next week. It has to do with violence against women. And now I'm on my way to another few events still today.
So we get to take a quick peek at the way things are going in Israel, driving in the car with your driver, who is a woman also, and another assistant I see in the back. I thank you for taking the time.
She's not a driver. She's not a driver. She's an advisor. She does amazing work, and she also drives, so I can speak with you and not risk the three of us. So she's the spokesperson here in the back. Two of them are women, and we all drive the car, but for the sake of not having a car accident, she's driving.
That's great. So Tamar, what do you think about the role of women in managing this crisis in Israel? I think we saw some women actually from the health ministry, but when you look at the management in the cabinet and in the government, it was more of a male dominant event. What do you think about, you know, the year that we have just finished?
Yes, I think that the crisis in this past year revealed some of the long-time disease that Israel has in leadership and in our democracy and our social services. One of them is the male dominance of our leadership in the senior positions in the government, in the Knesset, in the cabinet, and 2 days ago, for the International Women's Day, an Israeli think tank, מכון הישראלי לדמוקרטיה, I think it's
the IDI, Israel Democracy.
IDI, yes, thank you. They had a research comparing the situation of women representation in Israel in senior positions to other countries. And they found very poor representation. The representation in the Knesset never crossed a third of the members. The highest number was 37 2 terms ago, and out of 120, so we never crossed a third of the members. In the government, the record number is the current government with 8 women ministers, who is less than a quarter of the, less than 25% of the entire government. We had one woman prime minister when she was elected almost 50 years ago. She was the third in the world. Since then, of course, you know what happened in the world, and we never had another one since the late Prime Minister Golda Meir. We had only one Speaker of the Knesset. 3 of the most important committees were never chaired by a woman. So you can see that the representation is very poor. And I think that managing the crisis, and especially comparing to other OECD countries, we can see that women's representation, it's not only about representation. It's not just a symbolic thing. It's also about the decisions that are being made. It's also about who is thinking about the families. Is there a diversity around the table in the solutions that are being proposed and the decisions that are being taken? And I think that Israel has a lot to take pride on in the vaccination operation and many others, but I think Israel could have performed much better in the crisis. And I think had the cabinet and the government more diverse and more women around the table, we would see better results.
You know, coming up to the next 24th Knesset, you will be a member of the Knesset. You are number 2 in Meretz, and you were the chairwoman of the party until 2 years ago, I think. What do you plan, or what do you think you can use your legislating tools to promote the interest of women after COVID, after a year of COVID?
Yes, again, I think that COVID only stressed some of the most, diseases that were there before. As Meretz, we are the most feminist party that has the most feminist legislation that also we take upon ourselves. We are the party that was for more than 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago, made it a rule in our internal regulation to have at least 40% of women's representation in every elected body, of course, starting from the Knesset list, but also our internal institutions. We are number 1 in feminist and pro-women legislation. We sent to the Knesset the most prominent feminists, starting from our first chair, the late leader, Shulamit Aloni, who was maybe the founder of the civil rights movement in Israel in the late 70s. Followed by Zehava Galon and Michal Rozin and myself. I'm proud to tell you that out of the 7 chairs that Meretz had in its 30 years of history, we had 3 of them are women, including myself. I think that everywhere you look, you would see that Meretz is the most feminist movement in the Knesset. And I'm very proud to say that our ideas and inspiration in that respect moved from Meretz to other parties as well. And now you can see women who describe and identify as feminist in other parties, in the right wing as well. And very often people ask us, they took your agenda, they stole your agenda. And we say, this is a source of pride for us. It makes us very proud to know that our ideas spread.
Okay, let me just stop you for a minute, because I think it's a well-known fact that your party is feminist, and I'm happy that you mentioned the word feminist several times. It's a pleasure to hear that. But I want to ask you more specifically, what do you plan, what part of the workforce maybe is on your agenda to tackle or to solve as a legislator next month when you are entering, maybe it's not next month, in 13 days, when you are entering the 24th Knesset?
Yes, so we will continue our work. For example, I'm just now coming from a panel regarding violence in the family. This is also a disease that was increased to a large extent during the pandemic, during the COVID crisis. number of calls that the assistant, the emergency numbers received increased in hundreds of percent during this crisis, coming on this Knesset, the Knesset that is now being dissolved, the first vote that the plenary took was my proposal to set a special committee to investigate why the governmental plan to deal actually with through the welfare ministry in the issue of violence in the family and violence against women is so poor. And we had a little bit of work during this Knesset and it was dissolved. And now we try to, we will of course continue that in the next Knesset. I had another piece of legislation that I just passed regarding the that it will be forbidden to fire women coming out of a shelter. Mm-hmm. We will continue our work in these issues.
Can I ask you, do you have a prediction how many months this 24th Knesset will stick? When do we expect the election to the 25th Knesset? Is it in a month, or do you think we're going to have maybe 3 years of a Knesset?
That is the one question that no one can answer. You know that in Israeli politics, expect the unexpected has become the best strategy and the best prediction. I cannot tell you whether it will last 1 month or 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. And I think this is about approximately the margins that it can take.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about your personal issues, if that's okay. I want to ask you about in the Knesset, when you are as a woman, we know we still have 25% women, and we are not even close to 50%. Is the Israeli parliament treat the women MKs properly? Do you get comments, or are you do you have to hold off some reactions or treatment in your day-to-day politics?
I think that every woman around the world, maybe the most universal phenomena is inequality towards women in every aspect of our lives, in salary, in sexual harassment, in having to work harder to achieve the same, etc. And the Israeli Knesset is no different. I think that every woman in politics, in business, in academy, in NGO, no one and nowhere is vaccinated from the inequality that still exists. Mm-hmm. And I think once I will finish my term in the Knesset, I can write a book about the comments that I got, the way that I was treated.
Don't wait for the book. Don't wait for the book. Give us the scoop right now.
Well, Tal, maybe I can now confess that you are writing a book and interviewed me to a book that you are working on that had to do with some of these issues. But I think it's very, I don't know. I think it's maybe other societies have different manifestations of that. In Israel, that people are very explicit and very, being polite and being very, I don't know. This is not one of our something that characterizes Israelis. So I think we get that more explicit as women, but I think that no society and no women around the world is free of that. I recently watched I think it was a Netflix 3-episode series about Hillary Clinton. And I think that every woman in politics could identify with her struggling even in the top of the most senior position in the world. So yeah, I think we are very far from achieving equal, everything.
Can you maybe last question? I think for campaigns. I mean, I am a political journalist working for campaigns. It's less than 2 years when we are heading to the polls for the fourth time. Your schedule as a working member of the Knesset, as a representative for the Israeli public, your schedule must be very, very different when you are campaigning. And I suppose it's taking a toll on personal life, on everybody's life. I mean, not just you. Can you maybe tell us a bit about the way you work, your hours? What do you do? I mean, a fourth campaign in such a short time.
Yeah, well, so the last 2 years for me personally has been really a roller coaster. So the first campaign, I was the chair of the party and I was leading the party to a campaign. Then the second one, my internal party convention was not happy with the outcome that I was leading, and they had a very quick internal primary election in which I lost to the current sitting chair. Then I got pregnant. Then I had one campaign, and the third campaign, I was pregnant, and I gave birth to my baby child 2 weeks before the third elections. Then coronavirus, the crisis started, and now 2 weeks before the fourth election.
And you have another teenager sitting at home from school, right? So
I have one teenager in front of, still most of the time learning in Zoom, because school in junior high hasn't really started back yet. I have a baby who was born into the crisis. And I'm campaigning for the fourth time, trying to manage between Zoom, campaigning and traveling in the roads, and campaigning, personally. That we are just starting to do that again. So I think I had a lifetime that I passed in those 2 years. But that's politics. This is also what we love about it.
Well, I don't think politics is about campaigning 4 times in 2 years. I think it should be different, but
yeah, you're right.
And also the things that you are telling, I must say, I think young parents with either men or women are experiencing a very hard time in those years. If there is another question that anyone wants to ask Tamar, I will be happy to take it. Or if not, I think we're going to wish you good luck, because we know Meretz is fighting for the party's life, like in any campaign, but it's again the same story. So thank you, good luck, and I hope to see you in the next Knesset.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and good luck to you too.
And I want to thank everybody who participated in this very interesting panel, and to the researchers and the doctors and the professors, and obviously to the German ambassador to Israel, which I hope to meet in person any day soon. And of course to the Jerusalem Press Club for organizing and inviting me to host this panel. Stay healthy, everybody, and get vaccinated.
Thank you very much, Tal, and thank you very much to everyone. We will have the recording of this event very, very soon on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.